December 1943. The military hospital at Fort Dix, New Jersey, was overflowing with wounded men brought from the European theater of operations. In the white corridors, filled with the smell of antiseptic and suffering, 22-year-old Elizabeth Beth Thompson hurried from ward to ward, her white coat fluttering like the wings of a guardian angel. "Nurse! Nurse, please!" a hoarse voice called from ward number 7. Beth stopped, pushing a strand of brown hair that had escaped from under her white cap back into place. In the doorway, she saw a young soldier trying to raise himself on a hospital bed. His left arm was bandaged all the way to his shoulder, and his face showed a mixture of pain and despair. "Lie still, soldier," she said softly, approaching his bed. "What's your name?" "James Carter, ma'am." "Jim," he replied, and his gray-blue eyes met her brown ones. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you help me write a letter? My hand—" Beth looked at his bandaged arm and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Who are we writing to?" "My mother. She's in Iowa on the farm. She's probably already received a notice that I'm wounded and is worried." Beth spent the next half hour writing down Jim's words of comfort for his mother. His voice, initially shaky, became more confident as he talked about his comrades, how beautiful France looked before the war turned its fields to ruins, and how he would soon recover and return home. "You're not writing what I'm saying," Jim noted when Beth paused. "You said the shrapnel hit your lung. Why worry your mother? She's an Iowa farm woman, Miss Thompson. She's tougher than you think." "Beth. Call me Beth," she smiled, "and I still think some truths can wait until you get home." That's how their friendship began. Every day, Beth found time between her rounds to visit Jim. She brought him newspapers, read aloud when his eyes got tired, and continued to write letters for him, not only to his mother, but also to friends who remained at the front. "Why did you become a nurse?" Jim asked one January evening as snow fell outside the hospital windows. "My father was a doctor," Beth replied, adjusting his pillow. "He was killed at Pearl Harbor. He was there for a medical conference when the Japanese attacked. I wanted to continue his work, to help those who protect our country." Jim silently took her hand with his good right one. "I'm sorry. And you? Why did you go to war? Was there a choice?" "After Pearl Harbor, our whole village enlisted. My older brother Tommy went first. He was killed during the landing in North Africa." His voice wavered. "I thought I'd get revenge for him, but instead, I realized that war isn't about revenge. It's about protecting those you love, so that people like you can live in peace." Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Jim talked about his farm, how the fog blanketed the cornfields in the mornings, about his dream of becoming a teacher after the war. Beth shared memories of Philadelphia, where she grew up, and of the medical college she dropped out of after her father's death to become a nurse. By February, Jim could sit up and then walk. Beth often found him by the window, watching the snowy parade ground where new recruits were training. "What are you thinking about?" she asked one day, walking up to him. "That I'll be discharged soon. They'll send me home on leave and then maybe back to the front. Your lung isn't fully healed yet. The board might deem you unfit for combat duty." "What if they don't?" Jim turned to her. "Beth, I want to give you something." He took a small silver locket on a chain from his pocket. "This belonged to my grandmother. She gave it to me before I shipped out, said it would bring good luck. I guess it did. It brought me to you." "Jim, I can't." "Please, if they send me back there, I want to know that a piece of me stays with you." Beth took the locket with trembling hands. A tiny 4-leaf clover was engraved on it. "I'll write to you," she whispered. "Every day." "Promise?" "I promise." A week later, Jim was discharged. On the day he left, it was raining, turning the February snow into gray slush. Beth couldn't leave the hospital. A new batch of wounded had arrived. She ran out onto the porch for just a minute to say goodbye. "Take care of yourself," she said, adjusting the collar of his uniform. "I'll come back for you, Beth. After the war, I promise." Their first kiss was a quick, stolen one, in view of dozens of hospital windows. And then the army truck drove Jim away, leaving Beth to stand in the rain with the silver locket in her hand. March 1944. Dear Beth, I'm writing to you from a train that's taking me home to Iowa. Snowy fields of Pennsylvania are rushing past the window, and I'm thinking of you. How are you? How are the new patients? I hope none are as difficult as I was. I didn't give you the locket for no reason. In our family, there's a tradition. It's worn by the person who is waiting. My grandmother wore it when my grandfather went west to build the railroad. My mother, when my father fought in World War I. Now it's your turn to wait. I'm sorry to place such a burden on you. Your Jim. Dear Jim, I received your letter. I wear the locket under my uniform dress, close to my heart. Sister Margaret, do you remember that strict Irish woman from the 3rd Ward? Noticed the chain and gave me a lecture for violating the rules. But I won't take it off. The hospital is overcrowded. After the landing in Italy, there were even more wounded. Yesterday, a boy from Texas arrived, so young, barely 18. He lost his leg. He cried all night, calling for his mom. I sat with him until morning, holding his hand. In those moments, I think of you, of all of you who have gone through this hell. Please write to me about peaceful life, about your farm, your mother, how the apple trees are blooming in Iowa. I need to remember that there's a world somewhere without blood and pain. With love, your Beth. April 1944. Beth, my love, spring has come to Iowa. Mom has planted the south field with corn, and I'm helping as much as I can. My left hand is still weak, but it's getting stronger every day. In the evenings, I sit on the porch and carve little wooden figures. I started making a miniature farm for our future children. I'm sorry to get ahead of myself, but thinking about a future with you is the only thing that keeps me from going crazy with waiting. The board declared me fit for limited duty. This means they won't send me to the front, but they might call me up for rear echelon service. I don't know whether to be happy or ashamed. My friends are out there, under fire, and I'm growing corn. Tell me about yourself. What do you like to eat for breakfast? What's your favorite color? Do you sing in the shower? I want to know everything. Forever yours, Jim. Jim, darling, don't be ashamed of staying home. You've already paid your debt to the country in blood. Your mother needs you, the farm needs you. And I need to know that you're safe. For breakfast, I love toast with jam and strong coffee, which is terrible here, army rations. My favorite color is green, like the cornfields you write about. And yes, I sing in the shower, even though my voice isn't great. Mostly Andrew's sister's songs. I'll Be Seeing You has become my favorite. Have you heard it? I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. Every time it plays on the radio, I think of you. P.S. A miniature farm for our children? James Carter, is that a proposal? Yours forever, Beth. June 1944. Beth, we just heard on the radio the Allies have landed in Normandy. The whole village is celebrating. Maybe the war will be over soon. Maybe I can come for you? And yes, consider my letter a proposal. I know we only spent a month together. I know you could find someone better, a doctor from Philadelphia, not a farmer from Iowa. But I love you, Elizabeth Thompson. I've loved you since the moment you refused to write the truth about my injury so as not to upset my mother. Marry me, after the war, when I can get down on one knee without grabbing my side, with hope and love, Jim. But Jim never received a reply to this letter. August 1944. Beth wrote, every day, just as she promised, but the military postal service was a capricious mistress. A ship carrying mail in July 1944 struck a mine in the Atlantic. Thousands of letters went to the bottom, and among them was Beth's reply to Jim's proposal. "Yes," she wrote in that sunken letter. "1,000 times yes. I will marry you, James Carter. I'll be a farmer's wife, learn to milk cows and bake apple pies. Just wait for me." But Jim never got that letter. He didn't get the next 10 either. And then the notice came. He was being sent to a training camp in Texas as an instructor for new recruits. He had a week left before he had to leave. "Why aren't you answering, Beth?" he wrote in despair. "Did I say something wrong? If you don't want to get married, just write. Any answer is better than silence." Meanwhile, Beth, having not received any letters from Jim for 2 months, came to a terrible conclusion. In the hospital, she had seen too many soldiers who, in a moment of passion, promised to marry nurses, only to return home and forget their words. "Wartime romances," Sister Margaret would say cynically. "Maybe it's for the best," Beth told herself, hiding the locket deeper under her uniform. "What kind of farm woman would I be?" But at night, she still cried into her pillow. September 1944. Jim left for Texas without ever getting a reply. Before he left, he stopped by the military post office in Des Moines and asked to check what had happened to the mail. The clerk shrugged indifferently. "It's a war, Sergeant. Letters get lost. Maybe your girl just stopped writing." In Texas, Jim threw himself into his work. He taught 18-year-old boys what he knew: how to survive under fire, how to help a wounded comrade, how to write a last letter home. In the evenings, he still wrote to Beth, but without any hope of a reply. And Beth was transferred. The hospital at Fort Dix was being disbanded, and the staff was being distributed to other military hospitals. She was sent to California, to Letterman Hospital in San Francisco, where the wounded from the Pacific Theater of Operations were brought. She left her new address at the office, but military bureaucracy moved slowly. Jim's letters continued to arrive in New Jersey, where they were put in a box marked "Addressee has moved." December 1944. "Merry Christmas, Beth, wherever you are," Jim wrote in his last letter. "A year ago we met. The best thing that happened to me in this war. I'm sorry if I was too persistent. Be happy. Goodbye, Jim." On the same day, Beth was writing her last letter. "Jim, if you still remember me, Merry Christmas. I wear your locket every day. Sometimes it feels like our meeting was a dream, but the scar on your side and the clover on my neck say otherwise. Be happy, wherever you are. Always yours, Beth." This letter was returned to her with the note, "Addressee has moved. New address unknown. San Francisco." The war was over. Beth remained working at St. Mary's, a civilian hospital in San Francisco. She liked the city. It was lively, full of hope and new beginnings. She rented a small apartment in the Richmond district, bought a used Ford, and tried to build a new life. She still wore the locket, hidden under her civilian clothes. Sometimes, walking past soldiers in uniform on the city streets, she would involuntarily look for a familiar pair of gray-blue eyes, but Jim was not among them. "It's time to let go of the past," her friend Dorothy, also a former military nurse, told her. Dorothy was already engaged to a sailor she had met at a VJ Day dance. Beth tried. She went on dates arranged by colleagues, nice men, doctors, lawyers, officers who had returned from the war. But every time someone took her hand, she remembered how Jim had held her palm in his on that January evening when he talked about his brother. 1948. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Jim returned home after his discharge and, as he had dreamed, became a teacher. He taught history and English at the local school and helped his mother on the farm on weekends. The town considered him an eligible bachelor, young, with a profession, a war veteran. The mothers of well-known families regularly invited him to Sunday lunches where their unmarried daughters just happened to be. Jim was polite but distant. The townspeople whispered that he had a girl during the war who had broken his heart. No one knew the details. Jim never talked about Beth. Only once a year, in December, he would take out a stack of her letters, the ones he had received before June 1944, and reread them. Then he would go to the post office and send a postcard to the Fort Dix Hospital with a single line, "Still remember, Jim." The postcards were returned with the note, "Hospital disbanded. 1952. Korea." When the Korean War began, Beth volunteered. "You're running from yourself again," said Dorothy, who was now a mother of 2. But Beth needed to be useful, needed to lose herself in work. At a military hospital in Pusan, she met Chaplain O'Brien, an Irishman with kind eyes and a quiet voice. He would come to read prayers to the dying and often stayed to talk to Beth. "You're wearing a locket under your uniform," he said one day. "A memory of someone?" "Of someone I lost in the last war," Beth answered honestly. "Lost in battle?" "No, just lost. War scatters people, Father." O'Brien nodded with understanding. "You know, I believe that the Lord doesn't let us meet people for no reason. If that meeting was important, your paths will cross again." Beth smiled bitterly. "America is a big place, Father O'Brien." "And God is even bigger," the chaplain replied. 1960. Years passed. Beth returned to San Francisco and became the head nurse at the hospital. She bought a house in the suburbs and got a dog, a golden retriever named Clover. On weekends, she volunteered at a veterans hospital. Jim got married in 1955. A good woman, the daughter of a neighboring farm owner. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. He became the school principal, a respected man in town. But sometimes, when his wife and children were away visiting relatives, he would take out the old letters and the wooden figures he had carved in the spring of 1944. A miniature farm for the children he and Beth would never have. Washington, D.C. Beth came to the Capitol for a conference for veteran nurses. She was 54, her hair was gray, but she still wore it in the same style as during the war. The locket was now in a box at home. Wearing it had become too painful. After the official part of the conference, a reception was held at the National Museum of American History. Beth wandered through the halls, looking at the exhibit on World War II. Suddenly, she froze. On a stand with photographs of military hospitals was her picture, a group shot of the Fort Dix Hospital staff, taken in 1944. "Do you recognize anyone?" a man's voice asked from behind her. Beth turned and met the gaze of the gray-blue eyes she had been looking for on the streets of San Francisco for 30 years. "Jim?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He had aged, gray at the temples, wrinkles around his eyes. But it was him, her Jim. "Beth, I brought a school field trip. I saw a poster for the nurses' conference, and I hoped." They stood in the middle of the museum hall, unable to look away from each other. Visitors walked around them, like a river around stones. "You stopped writing," Jim finally said. "No, you stopped. After June 44, I didn't get a single letter." They both understood at the same time what had happened. The war that brought them together had separated them with a silly coincidence, lost letters, a bureaucratic error. "I waited," Beth whispered. "A year, 2. Then I decided you had forgotten. I wrote until December. Then I decided you didn't want to answer my proposal." "What proposal?" Beth frowned. "I asked you to marry me. In a letter from June." Beth pressed her hand to her lips. "I never got it. Jim, I never got it." They left the museum and walked for a long time on the National Mall. They talked about the years that had passed, about losses and gains. Jim showed her photos of his children. Beth talked about Korea, about her work. "I still have your locket," she said, as they sat on a bench near the Lincoln Memorial. "And I have your letters." All the ones I received. What do we do now? Beth asked. You're married. You have a family. Margaret died 3 years ago, Jim said quietly. Cancer. The kids are all grown up now. Jimmy has his own family. They were silent, looking at the reflection of the Washington Monument in the water. We lost 30 years, Beth said. But we still have time, Jim replied and took her hand. If you'll let me. 1976. Jim came to San Francisco for spring break. Beth met him at the airport, as nervous as a young girl. They were no longer the young people who had fallen in love in a military hospital, but the feeling was still there, hidden deep, preserved by time, but alive. For a week, they just talked. They walked around the city, sat in small cafes, and made up for lost years. Jim talked about his children, about how he had cared for his wife during her illness. Beth talked about her work, her dog, and the house that always seemed too empty. "Show me the locket," Jim asked one evening. Beth took the tarnished silver chain from a box. Jim held the locket in his hands, turning it, looking at the engraved clover. "My daughter Sarah wore it at her wedding," he said. "I told her the story, not all of it, just that it's a family heirloom that brings good luck in love. I didn't say I gave it to the woman I loved more than life itself." "Jim!" "No, let me finish. I loved Margaret. She was a good wife, a wonderful mother. But she always knew that a part of my heart belonged to a ghost from the past. She even found the letters once. She wasn't jealous, she just smiled sadly and said, 'I hope she was worthy of such love.'" Beth cried. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to mourn all the years they had lost. "We were fools," she sobbed. "We should have looked for each other. We both thought we had been rejected. Pride and pain are bad advisers." Jim hugged her. "But we found each other, Beth, even if it was 30 years later." The next day, Jim met Beth's children. That's what she called Dorothy's children, who treated her like their own aunt. They welcomed him warmly, asked about the war and about the school in Iowa. "Aunt Beth was always alone," the youngest, Katie, said. "It's good that she has you now." Summer 1976. Jim returned to Iowa to sort things out. He submitted his resignation, to the astonishment of the school board. He decided to leave the house to his son, who had inherited the farm business. "You're leaving for her?" Jimmy asked, looking surprisingly like his father in his youth. "Yes." "Is she the woman from the letters? The ones you keep in your desk?" Jim nodded. "Mom knew about her. She said you sometimes called her name in your sleep." "Beth, mother was a wise woman. She would have wanted you to be happy, Dad. Sarah and I want that." In the autumn of 1976, 32 years after their first meeting, Jim and Beth got married. A modest ceremony in a small church in Sausalito with only the closest friends and family. Beth wore the locket over her wedding dress. "Now you can stop waiting," Jim said as they exchanged rings. "I already have," Beth replied, "the moment I saw you in the museum." 1980s. Jim and Beth built a quiet, happy life in California. Jim got a job teaching at a local school, not as a principal, but as a simple history teacher, and he was happy about it. Beth continued to work at the hospital, but reduced her hours. On weekends, they traveled, making up for lost time. Jim's children grew to love Beth. Sarah named her daughter after her, Elizabeth. Jimmy brought his sons over for the summer, and Beth taught them to bake apple pie using Jim's mother's recipe. "You know, I never did learn to milk cows," Beth laughed. "And thank God," Jim replied. "I can just picture you in rubber boots in the cowshed." They often talked about the past, but without bitterness. The lost years had taught them to cherish every day together. Jim set up a workshop in the garage and returned to wood carving. Beth planted a garden where she grew roses of every shade. Once a year, in December, they would take out the old letters and reread them together. "We were so young," Beth would sigh. "And so foolish," Jim would add, "but I wouldn't change a thing, not even those 30 years apart." Why? Because they made us who we are, and they led us back to each other again. 1990s. For the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, they were invited to a veterans' reunion. Old soldiers and nurses gathered at a hotel in Washington, sharing memories. Beth met a few of the girls she had served with at Fort Dix. "Beth Thompson," one of them exclaimed. "We thought you disappeared. After you were transferred, no one knew where you went. Now I'm Beth Carter." She smiled and pointed to Jim. "Remember the sergeant from Ward 7? The one who dictated letters to me?" The women gasped. Beth and Jim's story quickly spread through the room. By the end of the evening, a local newspaper reporter was interviewing them. "Love That Conquered Time" was the title of the article that came out the next day. The story touched many people. Letters from readers poured in for weeks, from other couples separated by the war, from their children and grandchildren. "We're famous," Jim laughed. "At our age?" Beth scoffed. "What nonsense!" But she carefully kept all the letters and the newspaper clipping. 2000s. They welcomed the new millennium surrounded by their large family. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the house in Sausalito could barely hold them all. Little Lizzie, their great-granddaughter and Beth's namesake, would sit on her great-grandfather's lap and listen to the story of how he met her great-grandmother. "And you really didn't see each other for 30 years?" she would ask in disbelief. "Really," Jim would nod. "But love doesn't look at a calendar." Beth was no longer working, and Jim had also retired. They spent their days in the garden, reading and entertaining guests. In the evenings they would sit on the porch, holding hands, and watch the sun set behind the Golden Gate Bridge. "You know what I think about?" Beth said one day. "If we hadn't lost those letters, our lives would have been different. We would have had other children, other grandchildren. And even though I love the life we would have built together, I can't imagine a world without Jimmy, without Sarah, without all of our grandchildren." "Destiny," Jim agreed. "Father O'Brien was right. The Lord knows what he's doing." 2010. Jim turned 89. His health began to fail. The old wound took its toll, and his heart was getting weaker. Beth, 2 years younger, cared for him with the same tenderness she once used to bandage his wounds. "I'm your patient again," he would joke. "My favorite patient," she would reply. They knew their time was coming to an end, but they weren't afraid. They had spent 34 years together, more than many couples who got married young. Every day was a gift. On one clear October day, Jim asked for the old letters and the locket. "I want Lizzie to have this," he said. "When she grows up, let her know that true love is worth waiting for. I'll be sure to give it to her," Beth promised, though her heart ached with premonition. Jim died peacefully in his sleep, holding her hand. There were so many people at the funeral, all of his family and former students who remembered their beloved history teacher. A military band played taps, and Beth remembered all the times she had heard that melody in the hospital. Epilogue, A Letter Through Time, 2015. Beth lived to be 92. She spent her final years in a nursing home in Sausalito, surrounded by the care of her family. On clear days, the nurses would take her out into the garden, where she would sit with her eyes closed, her face in the sun. Before she passed, she asked for Lizzie, who was now 18, the same age Beth had been when she became a nurse. "This is for you from your great-grandfather," Beth said, handing her a worn leather folder with the letters and the silver locket. "And from me, the story of our love." "Grandma Beth, it's so romantic and so sad," Lizzie sobbed. "No, my dear, not sad. We found each other. We may have lost 30 years, but the last 34 were happy. True love will always find a way. Remember that." Beth died a week later. She was buried next to Jim in a small cemetery overlooking the bay. On their shared gravestone, a line from the song was engraved: "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places." Lizzie keeps the letters and the locket. Sometimes she rereads them, marveling at how much love a human heart can hold. The story of her great-grandparents teaches her to believe in love, in destiny, and that it's never too late to find your happiness. And somewhere out there, in a better world, a young nurse in a white coat hurries down a military hospital corridor to help a wounded soldier write a letter home. Their eyes meet, and a love story begins that will survive war, time, and even death itself, because true love is eternal.